fill us in on what's happening with Hydro-Quebec and Lower Churchill right now?
Well, Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia, and through involvement with Nalcor Energy, have made a joint application for a P3 funding. P3 is a federal finance Canada fund, which funds infrastructure programs throughout the country. Late in June, I think it's probably around the 30th or the end of June, we made an application to the federal government for a contribution from the federal government for funding for a link between Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia going to Sydney, which would in fact enable us to link up our hydroelectric power from Labrador with Nova Scotia and vice versa if they wanted to transport any power back. So in effect, it would basically give us an alternate route, so we would not have to go through Quebec. We'd go basically what's been called the maritime route, and it would also enable us then to also provide power to New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island. So basically, even though it's a two-province application, it's an Atlantic application so that this power in Labrador can be provided through Atlantic Canada.
And Hydro-Quebec is objecting to this move?
Well, what's happened here is, and we've learned it through another source, that the Prime Minister was written by, as I understand it, the Premier of Quebec, or certainly the Government of Quebec, and I think it was under his signature, objecting to the fact that we made an application. Now, I don't know what gives Quebec, or the Government of Quebec, or the Premier of Quebec, the right under any circumstances to object to an application for funding by 4 other provinces that are having nothing to do with Quebec, not looking to go through Quebec, are looking to find an alternate route as a result of Quebec actually blocking the route that we'd sought, one of the routes that we'd sought to take. And through a regulatory blockbuster, I guess, through the RAGE, we were prevented from moving power that way. So we've always had the maritime route as an alternative. What I find particularly galling, though, is why they would turn around and write the Prime Minister of Canada objecting to something that 2 other provinces are doing. Now, you have to remember, this is a province that has the benefit of getting $17 billion in federal transfers, that has, I think, on its books, probably over $5 billion in loan guarantees to just its aerospace industry alone. Newfoundland and Labrador certainly hasn't objected to any of that. It's a province that has taken virtually the benefit of every fund that's been available federally and has done it, and we're quite willing to permit that, to allow it, to welcome it. We have no objection to the province of Quebec getting its rightful funds. But for them to go in behind our backs and intervene, I think it's just a sad commentary on the state that Canada has gotten into as a result of the actions of Quebec and the right that Quebec feels it has in order to interfere with legitimate applications.
Are you concerned about the influence that the Quebec government may have in this matter?
No, I think, the Quebec government has always had a sphere of influence. I think that's waning. I think Canadians are finally wising up to the fact that, Quebec can't blackmail Canada because it has a certain number of seats that will enable the government to get elected. I think people are starting to realize that, Quebec has a legitimate place in Canada as a nation, and it has a role, and we're all certainly prepared to work together as members of the Canadian Federation. But when we have a situation when one province is deliberately trying to thwart at least 2 other provinces and indirectly affect 4 provinces, that's sad. We have a project here in Newfoundland and Labrador that's the best green project in North America. All we want to do is go ahead with it. Quebec could be a partner in that, in the sense that if we were providing any power through Quebec, we would pay legitimate fees, transmission fees. But no, they don't want us to go through Quebec, and now they don't want us to go anywhere. So in fact, they wanted to prevent us from building our hydroelectric power project in the Lower Churchill. And these are really very predatory competitive practices, and I don't like it, and I'm not going to put up with it.
And what's your theory as to why Quebec is doing this?
Quebec is doing it because they're claiming that this is a subsidy from the federal government for electric transport. Now, if every cent that went into Quebec was considered to be a subsidy, well, there would be no money to go to Quebec. Is the aerospace industry a subsidy? Is the money that's gone to help the forestry industry, is that a subsidy? Are, in fact, equalization transfers, are they, in fact, a subsidy? I mean, any monies that come from one government to another government, in my opinion, are given willingly, they're given out of necessity, and they're quite properly transferred. Quebec avails of many programs whereby they get assistance to promote their industries and create employment, and I welcome that, and I'm actually delighted that Quebec gets it. But leave us alone. I mean, if we're prepared to go in with a legitimate application, and the Government of Canada wants to entertain that application, well, then they should.
Is there now a cost analysis on the maritime route? How does it compare? the maritime route in comparison to going through Quebec?
The maritime route is more expensive than going through Quebec, and the reason is that you had to do an underwater cable from Labrador into the island of Newfoundland, and then you had to take a cable from the island of Newfoundland over to the mainland, which of course would be through Cape Breton. So it is a more expensive route, but as a result of the actions of the Régie, we were prevented from basically transporting any power through Quebec. So the other alternative is one that we've legitimately kept open for a long period of time. So, as a result, we had to take the more expensive route. It's still viable. It's still commercially viable, and the numbers work. So we had to look at that other route, and that's certainly what we're prepared to do.
Can you give us a sense of the numbers? Are we talking $1 billion, $2 billion, $10 billion?
Billions. It depends on the options that are used. You could have an isolated project in just Labrador. That could be just Gull Island and Muskrat, which is just totally in Labrador. That would mean, of course, you'd have to have enough industrial development to handle that kind of wattage. You could also then have it solely an island feed, whereby you have Labrador and you feed into the island. Or you can have Labrador feed to the island, feed to the Maritimes. So it depends on what stages of those that you develop in order to determine the magnitude of the cost.